Right, we'll call the meeting to order. And first on the agenda is public comment. Are there any public comments that were recorded or written?
There were no public comments sent to me that were recorded or written.
All right, then next up is the superintendent's report regarding COVID-19 operational update.
Okay, just a couple of things I want to touch base on, and then I'll turn it over to any of the directors that have anything they want to add. Not a lot has changed since last week when we gave the update. Big piece right now for us is the uncertainty piece. How long we're going to be kind of in this mode, and I don't know if that's me or somebody else. But I think there's a couple pieces that we're trying to look at. One of them is the people are asking about graduation. What is that going to look like? People are asking about long term. How long are we going to be in this? And I think the big thing is in the next 5 to 8 days, we'll have a better picture as to how long we're going to be sitting in this type of environment. The governor's stay-at-home order or safer at home order has us, as of right now, as we sit, going back to school on Friday the 24th. That's how long it's in place for. However, the governor does have the authority to extend that unilaterally till May 10th. After which time, I believe, from what I've been reading online, it requires the legislature to act to give them additional authority. So with that, I mean, it's really hard to know. When I asked the question, we talked about this in a meeting I was in earlier today. Heather was in the same meeting. I asked the question on Friday, how long do we think this is going to last? Somebody had said they're hearing maybe a couple months, and I'm thinking, I think it'll be a couple months. And so it's really hard to know. I mean, and people even asking me, Nick, do you have any thoughts? What do you think? And I really don't have any background on it. I just know that right now, without an act of the legislature, the governor has the ability to extend it to May 10th. I think the other piece is the legislature is convening tomorrow. I believe they're going to convene in I don't know if it's called an extraordinary session or what exactly. And I'm sure there's going to be some level of negotiations that are going to take place between the legislature and the governor as to what the continued process looks like. It's right now when you look at the state cases, you could almost draw a line from about my hometown of Dubuque, Iowa, which is the southwest corner of the state, up to Green Bay, and probably 90% of the cases are to the southeast of that line, maybe more than that. And so I'm sure there's going to be pressure, especially the northern 2/3 of the state that are saying, hey, are we going to get some relief from this? And what does that look like? With those things being said, we're not in any hurry to make any big sweeping decisions. This is one of those situations where I don't think being first necessarily gets you any bonus points. I think, we really want to wait and see what the governor sets up and does. Some districts are saying we're going to get out in front of this and we're going to say, regardless of what the governor says, we're doing online distance learning for the remainder of the year. And I don't think we want to do that. I don't think that's necessarily a good spot to be in. The other thing is we have some districts that want to say, hey, we're going to finish instruction on a certain day. And from that day, that's when we stop instruction of kids, but then staff will still work. Again, I don't think we want to talk too much about what that day would look like, because the last thing we want to do is say, we're going to stop instruction on a certain date, and then the governor comes out and says, hey, we can come back to school, and then all of a sudden we're telling people, actually, we're going to go back to our original date. So, I think our big thing is I think the next 5 to 8 days we'll have a lot more clarity of what we'd be able to tell parents as far as what's going to happen with our school, and also what's going to happen with things like graduation, things along those lines. We've run a bunch of different kind of scenarios of what it could look like, including delaying it well into July if we had to, in order to get to a point where some of the things are lifted where we can have gatherings. Pretty confident that we're probably not going to be able to have graduation as normal, where we pack 3,000 people into the gym, shoulder to shoulder and try to have graduation. So it's probably going to have to look different. I just don't know what that looks like. We're going to spend some time later in the meeting talking about the proposal for end of year grading for 1920. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about that right now. And then Dave is going to spend a lot, Dave and Sandy are going to talk about what types of things are we doing to deliver education, to give you kind of a heads up. That was something you guys had no questions about until we have a more extensive report on that as well. And at the last meeting, Tim talked about our food service and the amount of meals that they're providing on a daily basis. One of the things that we did last week is we made sure on Thursday that we had breakfast and lunches covered for Friday and Monday. So we were sending multiple days worth of breakfast and lunches home with kids, since we weren't going to be serving on Friday and Monday. But there will come a point, because we are not, we don't offer summer food service. Districts that usually have over 60% through this lunch qualify for what's called the summer food program. And that's not us. I mean, because we run about 13%. And so what I don't know, and this is something Tim and I will kind of work in research, is after school, our normal school gets out, the waiver, the way they've kind of pulled all, the restrictions off of who qualifies for these free meals. I don't know if that's going to continue into the summer or not. Right now we wouldn't have the ability to offer that beyond our normal school days, but that may have been removed also. So then that'll be some discussion as well, depending on how long some of these stay-at-home safer home orders are in place, and some of those things. Whether or not we would continue the grab-and-go meals even past our last day of school, and what that looks like. Childcare is something that Tracy addressed at the last meeting, and I think we're continuing right now. We are looking at the different tiers with what the governor's laid out in his order. I mean, right now we're primarily sticking with tier 1. We have gone into tier 2 with some employees, essential function folks, and things like that. But our biggest issue is if we start taking in too many, or we make it too broad, we're going to have to open up multiple sites in order to accommodate. And right now we feel like we have a pretty clear delineation line where it is medical personnel and first responders primarily. When we start to move into that second tier, it kind of starts to get gray in a hurry. We have not turned down anybody that has needed childcare up to this point. We've tried to figure out a way to make it work, but that's one of the things that as of right now, we don't have any plans to expand what we're doing. But again, those things could change as we work through it. I will be sending out an update communication email to district-wide, the parents and families and staff, just thanking them how things are going. But also, I'll be attaching in that email a link to a new website that has been put together. It's the Hudson Community Coronavirus Response website. It's a great resource that a group of community members have gotten together, including both of the Rotary clubs, to really put together to have kind of a one-stop area where people can go and find out if I need something or I need help, I can find it at this website. Or if I'm willing to volunteer or provide help one way or another, it's all on this one location. And so I'm going to put that, I'll be putting that web link in my letter as well. And if anybody's watching that link did just go live, I think today. And the link is it's HudsonCCR.com is the link to the website. And like I said, that'll be going out. And one of the things the school district has is we have the largest probably email list probably than anybody else in the area, because we have all of our family emails and things. And so if there are certain things that we can do to try to get information out to help the community and things like that, we want to make sure that we try to put that out and try to balance it with not over inundating parents with too many emails if they don't read our emails, but making sure that we are able to try to be part of the solution as well. So knowing that some of the technology stuff and instructional stuff's coming down the pipe, any questions you have with anything else that I kind of talked about? Go ahead, Heather.
So Nick, I'm curious, are we, when it comes to summer school age care, are we proceeding assuming that we're offering it? Because this would be about the time, right, when we would be promoting and starting to do registration. So what is our thinking about that?
As of right now, a lot of it's going to depend on what happens with the safety of homeowners and what they do with extension. It's the same thing with summer school as well. I think we'll be able to give you the answer to that question probably at the next work session, because we'll have, like I said, I think a lot more clarity in the next 2 weeks as to what things are going to look like. Right now, we're kind of planning for either way, how we want to do it. Other questions? Just realized I'm looking at the screen at all of you, but my camera's down here, so if I have to kind of move the camera up to the middle of the screen so that at least it looks as if I'm not doing other work while I'm trying to have a conversation with you all. So that's all I had, Jamie.
You're
Jamie,
on
you're
mute,
muted.
Jamie.
All right, Dave, you're up. Student
All
connections.
right, thank you. I think for this, and I believe we are streaming now, correct?
Yeah, I mean, we'll do our best. I'm gonna try to write on the agenda here, new link, because right now there's only seven people on watching. And we're up to like
Okay, and then Tim Miner, I'm hoping you can hear me. If you can share your screen and pop up the graphic that I'll be speaking to, that'd be great.
I'm not sure I know how to do that.
If you hover near the bottom, it says share screen, green button,
Got it?
and then you select the tab.
Which tab?
It would be the,
might be easier for you to share, Dave. Than for me.
yeah, I'll give it a, yeah, go ahead. Just stop there, I'll give it a try. My internet has been spotty. I didn't want to run the risk, but here I go. Okay, can you see the graphic of the weekly expectations for engagement?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. So wanted to fill you in on how we're using technology in these in the new environment. So everything I say, Sandy and I talk about this a lot. We always preface with the statement "at this time." We continue to refine, we continue to take feedback, learn, and adjust not only what we're delivering, but also our expectations for teachers. And we're trying to support teachers along the way and not put too much on their plate right away as we're figuring things out. But as you all know, the new educational environment that we find ourselves in, it creates a risk of potentially exacerbating existing access gaps that we have for students, and then also creating new ones, which is unique. There's new gaps for access that may not have been there before. An example of that is families that have healthcare workers in their family. They can have access gaps that might not have been there before. And technology becomes one of the most important tools we can use to, that we can leverage to mitigate those risks. So when we first realized that we may not be able to attend school or have students attend school, we sent out a survey to all families to identify technology access needs. With that, we purchased and distributed hotspots. So all families that indicated they did not have adequate internet access would have that. And then we also issued Chromebooks for any families who didn't have a device. And that's been done and it seems to be working well. Supporting families, just how to use the hotspot was the first challenge, but we worked through that. And we think that we are very solid in terms of families having at least enough access to carry out the basic expectations. So what we're using technology for, I put into 3 buckets, and one is communication, the other is personal connections, and then the last is instruction. If you take a look at that infographic, we broke down those 3 different categories. And the first one being the personal connections. Personal connections are so important to students, and we've heard that from the beginning, that some way to have kids connect with their teachers is incredibly important. We want to make sure kids still feel engaged with, not just with school, but specifically with their teacher. At the elementary level, that takes place with classroom teachers. At the secondary level, takes place with advisors. And the expectation right now is that it's one 15 to 20 minute live experience. We actually ask for that at the elementary level, especially not to be instructional. And there's a couple equity and data privacy issues. that relate to that. We'll talk about how we address the instruction differently. So our classroom teachers, as I said, at the elementary level, they're the primary personal connectors. So those meetings that we have, they take place on Google Meet, formerly called Hangouts. It's now called Google Meet. And again, focused on personal connection and social emotional learning. Many of the primary teachers are choosing to have several smaller meetings with smaller numbers of students. You can only imagine trying to have a Google Meet meeting with like 23 first graders and try to manage that. It can be challenging. So they're breaking that down into smaller groups. Also at the elementary level, our specialist teachers, music, art, PE, media, they're guest teachers. So what they do is they collaborate with the classroom teacher, and then they join these classroom meetings from time to time, bring some sort of special experience, whether it's a song or some sort of exchange about visual art, but something that they bring to that meeting to make it a little bit special. Then we'll go on to number 2, which is lessons. So our goal with instruction is to offer as close to the level of service that we offered in school in the new environment. But having said that, we have to be flexible with students and families, especially those that are struggling with access and keeping up with the work expectations. It's an incredibly fine line that we walk. We want to do as much as we possibly can for as many students, but at the same time, we need to make sure that we're always very flexible, because not all families are able to put in the same amount of work as everyone else. So all classroom elementary teachers and all secondary level teachers are expected to offer at least 2 lessons per week that are their own lessons. Now they're sharing many more lessons than that, but they might be created collaboratively with their professional learning community partners or their grade level teams, but at least 2 that are their teacher narrating the work. In terms of course load or workload, we ask the teachers try to gauge it so it equates to about half of the time that a student would typically be in class. So for a 45-minute class, 20-25 minutes of expected coursework. Obviously, that's an estimate because every student is going to work through that at different paces. The next level is what we call mini connections. Mini connections can be things like introductory messages, short 1-2 minute videos. There's some neat stuff that really helps kids feel connected to their teacher. We saw one teacher that introduced her pets to her class, and the class got a big kick out of that and just helped them feel connected. But those mini connections can also be more instructional. Might be an overview of the day. So they send out they'll have their weekly meetings, but some teachers are using those mini connections to a couple times a week have short videos that help explain the expectations that were laid out on a weekly basis. And that brings me to my next point. We are expecting now not all communication, but all sort of lesson plans or the instructional layout to be done weekly. Teachers are doing a great job getting a lot of information out, but daily information was becoming overwhelming, especially if you consider families that may have kids at multiple levels. They could be getting 10, 15 emails a day saying, here are your expectations. So we decided to lay it out in a weekly grid, and we've been getting great feedback from that. But then the final level is the most responsive use of technology to meet the needs of our students, and that's the one-on-one support. The one-on-one support, it can be one-on-one at the secondary level, actually can happen in small groups as well. There's differences by levels we have to consider when we work through the details, but every school is maintaining a communication log. And that communication log tells every teacher or every certified staff member in the school which family's been connected with and how do they like that connection, whether it's email or phone. It all starts with phone connections. But then if the family says, I prefer emails, it's easier to keep up, then we switch to that. But we use that communication log to identify families that may need more personal connection or more support. Teachers collaborate with the counselors and other professionals in the building to make sure that we're offering the support that's needed. But teachers are also offering one-on-one instruction, and it's very, very powerful. So if a student, an example would be a really good example that happens frequently. At the elementary level, we use everyday math. It's a really strong curricular program, but some of the expectations are different from the way we all learn math. And that can be really challenging for a parent who learned how to do math the way we probably all learned to do math, and then they're expected to teach it a different way. First of all, we told all our teachers, however a parent wants to help is the right way. If they want to use a way they learned, that's great. That's what we want to support. But if the parent is really interested in learning that new or different strategy, just contacting the teacher and saying, you know what, a 15-minute one-on-one lesson would be fantastic. And our teachers are doing that. And we'd expect that to be ramped up as we continue through this process. Now, obviously, this all requires a lot of professional learning. Our teachers weren't trained in this necessarily. Some have more technology skills than others, but there's a lot of professional learning that goes into this. So first, teaching and learning met with every single teacher in the district. That was done at the grade level or at the department level or at the PLC level, but every single teacher in the district had a chance to talk through the expectations. There are several documents we've sent out to all teachers that lay out these expectations in pretty specific detail. Then today actually was a professional development day. All teachers in the district were required to do training with Google Meet, and then there were several other training opportunities or professional learning opportunities. They were all asynchronous, meaning they were pre-recorded and the teacher could access them whenever they want. But at the same time, our coaches, instructional coaches, were holding office hours so that any teacher could log into those office hours and get synchronous or live support from coaches on the spot. This was the final day, essentially. We communicated these expectations that I'm sharing earlier. This was the final day to get that training, and then everything should be up and running at full speed starting tomorrow. Another thing we're doing is creating a Google site. So we have, again, we're sending a lot of information out to teachers, and we want to make sure they have a place they can go. So we don't put them in the same situation that a family is, where they need to go through 30 emails that we've sent. So Steve Schonecker, actually, who is our transportation assistant director, he's also used to be our tech coach. Since there aren't a lot of bus issues happening right now, we repurposed him, and he's creating the Google site for us, doing a great job with that. So that's a quick overview of that. Now I'm going to scroll up here. Do you see, it's really hard to see, it's very small, but the grid in that document, I'm assuming you are, I didn't hear anything. So yep, some nods, good.
Can you make it bigger, Dave? Zoom
Yes,
in.
I can. Yep, I'm gonna do that right now. How's that?
It's better.
Good. Okay, so this is one example of a document that teachers are using to sort of funnel their support and their questions. So it's on the right, all those resources are different tools we're using right now to meet the needs of all families and all students. You can see some that are very common that you've seen before, whether we're talking about Google Classroom, Google Forms, or Google Meet that we've talked about. But Screencastify is another one. Screencastify just allows a teacher to take like a Google presentation or a PowerPoint presentation, narrate it, and send it out to all of the families. Flipgrid is another interesting one. These links are live. You can actually take a look at some of these and see what they're all about. But some innovative tools that were used sort of on the periphery, but really weren't embedded deeply into what we had going on a day-to-day basis. Sue and I were actually chatting before the meeting, and every time we make a decision with teaching and learning, we first address the problem in front of us. So what do we need to do in an immediate sense to make sure kids and families have access to everything they need? But the next question is always, and how do we do this in a way that we can leverage this learning for improvements when we're all back on site? Because all of these tools offer some great ways to engage learners when we have our kids back on site and in our buildings. So that's just a really quick overview. There's obviously a lot to it, but with that, any questions, I'd be glad to entertain.
Mr. President.
Yes.
So Dave, one quick comment and then two questions. Kudos for the outreach and that face-to-face time with all of our kids. I think that's absolutely fantastic. How are we reaching out to our career tech ed kids, our STEM kids, some of our art students? A lot of that's more hands-on and perhaps not as viable online. And then the other question I have is from a tutoring perspective, sometimes kids need that one-on-one time with their teacher. How are we addressing that?
Sure. So first to the CTE, visual arts, some of the more hands-on. It is more challenging, there's no doubt. It doesn't translate as easily as, say, math or social studies. But what we're doing is, first, when we started, it was more of a menu system where those teachers were offering different activities, but it was more choice-based. We were focusing on the core areas, especially reading, writing, and math. As we've sort of got our stride, those expectations have ramped up. So it really is more about, here's what you would have been doing in school. Now I'm here to help you. I talked to an art teacher at the high school, and this art teacher changed what was happening in terms of expectations, but try to keep it as closely aligned to previous expectations. So that's always that process, right? It's the teacher saying, what were we doing before and what were the primary learning objectives? Not necessarily what was the project or what was the product, but what were the learning objectives? And then how can we translate that to this virtual world? In terms of the one-on-one tutoring, a couple of things that we're doing in that respect. One is that communication log, making sure we're finding out who needs the additional support. And we're going to have teachers this week actually communicate out that they are available for one-on-one support. They've all been doing office hours from the beginning, but I think some families interpreted office hours just to make a quick call and ask for clarification, not to receive instructional support. But the intent was that those office hours were also for instructional support. If we find ourselves in a position where teachers don't have enough time, they're doing so much one-on-one that their day is filling up, then we're going to start talking to either other teachers or other folks that we're paying right now in our system and getting them trained up in how they can offer additional support.
Mr. President?
Yes, Sue.
Yes, Dave, the Flipgrid, would you say that that's helpful to parents are talking about this need that their kids have to have contact with peers and, it's kind of the mental health side of kids being together with kids. Is that platform or any of the others supportive of that need for kids to just be with their friends in a classroom situation?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the best tool we have for that, honestly, is very similar to the one we're using right now, Google Meet, which operates very much like Zoom. So one of the challenges is what sort of activity do you engage in when you're in this environment? Instruction is different than personal connection. So at the elementary level, we're primarily using Google Meet for that personal connection to help them feel connected. And then what we would do is we'd move to that asynchronous and now here's your work. And then the teacher's available to check in one-on-one. So there's this whole group experience and then gets everyone sort of launched, gets everyone comfortable with the expectations. Then the learning occurs, whether that's supported from family members or it's done independently, however that might be done. And then there's the follow-up where the teacher offers individual one-on-one support. So we're heavily promoting Google Meet, as there's a couple really great tools that we have that link to Google Meet that allow us to offer direct support. As an example, if there's a technology issue and a family's having trouble connecting, they can contact our IT department and they can log right into that Google Meet and walk the parent through how to get connected and offer very responsive, timely support.
Thank you.
Okay, anyone else have a question? I'm scrolling through the views. I don't see any hands up. All right, thank you very much, Dave, for that report. And next up is the virtual charter. Is that you also, Dave?
That is me as well, yes, thank you. So for this one, I really don't think there's any need to share the screen. Am I still sharing the screen actually now that I say that? I probably am, and why am I?
You just need to go ahead and turn that off.
Yep. There we go. All right, are you back to your normal view?
Yep.
All right, fantastic. So I wanted to offer an update on our virtual charter school process. And specifically, there's some unique things happening right now that I wanted everyone to be up to speed on, not be surprised by some of the things happening. So we've been working through the process required to launch the Hudson Virtual Charter School. And I just wanted to remind everyone, the primary purpose, what this allows us to do to have a virtual charter school is to accept open enrolled in students into our virtual school system. Without having a virtual charter and actually having that charter approved, we can't accept open enrolled students into a virtual environment. Having this approved will allow that. But the timelines get somewhat complicated, especially this first time around, because the entity that charters with the school district has to be established before the Board of Education, you, can engage in that contract or the charter. So the very first step is the Hudson Virtual Charter had to become incorporated. That step was finalized on March 26th, and the document that linked to the agenda is essentially the document that memorializes that process. So now that the HVCS is incorporated, we must adhere to open meeting laws. That must might be a hard word, because Shana's advice is the law is kind of silent on this. Once the charter is engaged, definitely those laws need to all be open to the public. In between time, there's some question, but obviously it's in our best interest to be as transparent as possible, so we will. We're tentatively planning to hold our first official meeting April 23rd. That's a Thursday at 5:30. We would hold that meeting very similarly to the way we're holding this meeting. I wanted to make sure you understood that before we post that meeting so there are no surprises. The governance board for the Hudson Virtual Charter School right now is made up of 7 initial members. There's 4 community members who have or had students in the current Hudson Virtual School. Melissa Harris, Peter Jones, Stan Sias, and Shelly Tugis are those community members. They are fantastic. They're super engaged. They've already offered great ideas as we move forward before we even got to the point of having that organization incorporated. And then there's 3 district employees. So Sarah Engstrom-Wide, who's the virtual school coordinator, and then Aaron Schiltgen and myself. The community members who are on the board, they applied this past winter through an application process that we made available to all parents or guardians of current Hudson Virtual School students. So any family member who had a student in the virtual school received this invitation to apply. As we move on, the employees role, so Sarah, Aaron, myself, will shift to more of an administrative role, opening up more spots for additional community members to join the governance board. This first meeting we have up, it's just going to have 2 agenda items. The first one is to elect and select the governance board officers so we can actually run a meeting. And then the second one is to discuss the bylaws. We probably, or not probably, I don't think we plan on taking action on the bylaws, but just have that first discussion as a group. That role of the governance board is to oversee the operational, financial, and educational aspects of the virtual school. We'll establish a budget. It'll be based on a per pupil allotment based on the number of students in the virtual school. That still needs to be figured out, but the details related to all that and the bylaws will be addressed collaboratively with that governance board. So Shana Lewis helped us draft the contract, and we submitted a draft to DPI so they can offer feedback for a pre-approval. We plan on bringing that contract to you for your review at the April 27th work session, and then we would look to bring the contract back again in May for your consideration for approval. So that's where we are. A lot of moving parts. Again, a little complicated and convoluted right now, but once we get through this, it should move much more smoothly. Any questions?
President.
Yes, Sue.
So, David, so do you have some kind of model that you might look at for the bylaws development so you don't have to start from scratch?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, we already have some that Shana helped draft. So we have a pretty solid draft right now for the board to consider. All of the board members have already seen them and provided some feedback as well. And we just met with Shana today actually to talk a little bit more about the bylaws. So essentially we'll have 3 documents that will help guide us through this process and help us run the virtual charter. So there's the contract, which is really your role as the Board of Education. That's the most important document for you, because that establishes the connection between the school district and the virtual charter. And the virtual charter is set up as an instrumentality of the district. So essentially it's a school operating within the school district. It's not a totally separate entity. It sort of lives under the umbrella of the school district. And then the bylaws are the second. That's most pertinent to the governance board themselves, so they know how to function. And then finally, there's a handbook, which will have a lot more of the detail in how everything functions.
Okay, any other questions for Dave on the virtual school charter?
I would just like to say thanks to Dave and team, because keeping on track for this under the current circumstances with everything going on in the schools is impressive. Great job.
Thanks, Bob. That's all that kudos goes to Sarah Engstrom Wide. She's been phenomenal keeping this going. And the interesting thing in Sarah's position, so we all close up shop and everyone's job changes. Hers didn't as much because she was delivering virtual education before, so she still has the full load of responsibilities, but she's still supporting this process as we move forward. So thank you.
All right, very good. Thank you for your report. Moving on to action items. First up would be the consent items, and I would entertain a motion with the
Mr. President.
language in the, yes, Rob.
I'd like to pull item number 4, the vacation accrual terms from the consent agenda, please.
Okay, all right, we'll take that up as the first action item after consent. So is there a motion though to approve the consent? Heather? Heather, you got to unmute.
Okay, clicking back and forth. I move approval of the consent items and that the Chief Financial and Operations Officer be authorized to pay bills in the amount of $1,966,260.39.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Second, is that you, Bob?
Yep.
All right. Raise your hand if you're seconding so then I can see. All right, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor of approving the consent agenda items, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries. And Andrea, do we have any special announcements? You're on mute. You can just shake your head, I suppose.
No, we don't have any retirees.
No
All right.
retirees. We're doing a lot of hiring though. In the midst of all this stuff, we're still going forward with quite a bit of hiring.
All right, very good. All right, thank you for making your cameo appearance in the board meeting there. All right, next up is then the vacation accrual that Rob, you wanted this pulled, and do you have any questions with regard to this?
Yeah, just a couple quick clarifying items. Which roles specifically? I'm assuming custodians, but are there other roles outside of custodians affected by this agreement?
Yep. So I can go ahead and answer that. So there's two parts to this one. There's the modification to administrative contracts. And so there are two groups of people that this applies to: administrators and certain 12-month support staff. The administrators, again, it just gives them the opportunity to use their vacation up until the end of 2020. Support staff, you have to understand the only 12-month support staff, only 12-month support staff get vacation. Really the only two categories of 12-month support staff that get vacation, primarily 12-month secretaries and custodians. And
school age care.
And school age care, they're 12 months. The only employees, school age care and secretaries, are working remotely or coming in working on a rotating basis. The only employees not currently working there at 12 months would be our custodial staff.
Nick, you were kind enough to, respond to my email earlier, but is there any budgetary impact?
So no, this wouldn't have any budgetary impact because we don't get subs for a lot of those positions because you can't find them. So if there is a budgetary impact, it would be extremely negligible. And so, we don't have any budgetary impact on it. It's not like teachers, for example, where you're always getting a sub when those folks are gone.
Okay. And the last real quick question I have, a lot of people are off and yet getting paid. Is there, for the taxpayers at home, is there any reason why we would support this?
Well, I think the most important piece is really the only people that are are probably technically off and still getting paid, that aren't working remotely or on a rotation right at this exact moment are probably our custodial staff. However, I would say they tend to be folks that we count on. They're very tough positions to fill, and they're some of our. You gotta understand, when they start off in the district, they're only getting 2 weeks of vacation to start with. I mean, it's not as though they're getting gobs of vacation. They're rolling a bunch over. So I would say the majority of staff in our district, even though they're getting paid, are doing some level of work remotely. And there's a strong possibility custodians will be pulled in to start working in buildings sooner rather than later as well. But yeah, that's kind of the situation.
And the other piece I would say too is that this is going back. It was only the last couple of years that we've tightened up the timeline. Historically, it has been through December anyway. So it's just kind of giving a little bit more flexibility in this very unique situation to staff to use that time. But again, it was a practice before, I think 2 years ago, for many, many years to go through this through the end of December.
So likely would help with retention, just given we have these roles are fairly difficult to fill.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm good.
Is there a motion to approve the administration's recommendation? Yes, Carrie.
And Mr. President, when you get done, Carrie.
I guess I would make the further comment that since none of us knows what the situation will be throughout the summer and fall, and if in fact staff even at that time will be ready or be able to schedule vacation, this maybe shouldn't be the final word, but something that we might need to revisit given how everything shakes out.
Yeah, so you guys, what essentially is happening is, by approving this, you're approving basically an amendment to the support staff handbook and then an amendment to employees that actually have contracts. It automatically sunsets. So then if you did have to revisit this down the road, basically your new amendment would then supersede this existing one. So you would be covered that if you need to make a change down the road, you could absolutely do that.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Do you had a question?
President, yes, I have one, or I have a comment. I think we had an extensive discussion about staff and continuing to pay staff and so on at our previous meeting. And I thought the arguments that were presented, one of them being Rob mentioning retention, but we don't want to end up in the fall with the continuation of this great unknown and then not have people to put into support to certified staff positions, etc. So I think staff what our industry is all about here. So I think that they're the highest of priority to preserve in any way possible. And I like this idea of extending to the December date.
All right. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
By Rob, second by Sue. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries. Next up would be the agreement with Sioux City School District regarding special education services.
And this is, Aaron can speak to this, but essentially we have a student that's shared between districts. We have to have an agreement in place in order to do shared cost. We can't give you specifics about the students because of student privacy. If you want more specifics about it, then we're going to have to table this item, put it on the next meeting's agenda in a closed session. But this will be a pretty standard agreement. It's been reviewed by the attorney and us, and I think you'll be the administration's recommendation that you would agree to it.
And Aaron can give her a brief summary, but has anything changed since last Monday night?
No, this agreement has not changed. It's a very unique situation that doesn't happen very often where students are essentially enrolled in two different school districts, and in this case, across two states. So we've just been working collaboratively with that school district and our team and their team there to best meet the needs of those students and, so that we're working on the same things.
Okay. Very good. Yes, Rob.
Just a quick question. The agreement signed or dated rather December 9th from
Yep.
Sioux City.
Yep.
Why is that?
So we had originally drafted this agreement in December with them with the anticipation that we would bring it to you in December. At that time, the AEA, which is very similar to our CISA here, stepped in and said, you have this agreement with the school district, now you need to have a different agreement. The AEA was asking us to put an agreement together with them that replicated services that were already in the agreement with the school district. And so we've gone back and forth a little bit with them and ultimately landed on the original agreement that we had in December. So that's why there's that time gap.
Thank you.
Yep.
Or any, is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Heather, second by Carrie. Any further discussion regarding the agreement with Sioux City School District? Seeing no hands and hearing no questions, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Next up is the resolution for support of transportation alternatives funding partnership with Hudson. Tim Erickson, is this you?
Yes.
That's me. Yeah. So it's the same resolution that you saw on the 6th, and this is the partnership, the Safe Routes to Schools partnership. The application is for about $600,000 in total projects. So we've got sidewalk installation at Rock. We've got the Carmichael Road and Trail project crossing at the middle school, and then some lighting along the back north side of the high school. And then the city also has some pedestrian medians along Vine. So all of those things, but the resolution is the same as what you've seen before. We just need this as our next step in the process.
And this says partnership. What's the split, either percentage or dollar wise?
So the program, the Safe Routes to Schools program, funds 80% of the cost. So the split, our share is relatively small. It's only 16,000. The city's share is 98,000. We worked together to look at how the projects benefited the district and benefited the city, and we were able to come to really a very fair agreement.
And the city has approved this resolution?
The city has approved this resolution at this point, as far as I know. Yeah. So they'll be approving theirs tonight as well, as I think is what the timing was.
Simultaneous. All right.
Yeah,
Is
pretty
there a
much.
motion to approve?
Mr. President,
Oh, go ahead, Heather.
I was just going to say, anytime that we can be part of efforts to make our city more bikeable and more walkable, I am on board. So I would move approval of this resolution as presented.
Second.
All right. Sue and Rob were simultaneous there, but I'm going to give it to Sue because she was more verbal. All right. She had her mic on and Rob didn't. All right. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Those opposed, the motion passes to approve that agreement. And so then next up is another settlement agreement with mutual release for the Upper Midwest Athletic Construction. This has been an agenda item for 4 years. And,
It's been an ongoing saga, and this primarily has to relate to the color of the track at the high school. So there's nothing wrong with the performance of the track. It's merely a color issue. What we basically agreed to that with them is, we're past the 2-year original warranty that the district had in our original documents. However, they've agreed to come back and try to recode it again with a different product that would match the color, restripe the track, and do all those things. But in exchange, they didn't want us to keep coming back to them about the color. And so this is an agreement that's been drafted. It's been reviewed by our attorneys. We think it's in the district's best interest to go ahead and enter into that agreement. And then the track will have a coating put on it sometime in the next 3 months. And then this issue becomes a done issue.
okay. And I probably am not the only board member that had been hearing, the rumor about the track and whether or not we can host sanctioned events at the track. This agreement doesn't impact, well, first of all, if you could address the rumor in second, this
Uh,
doesn't affect.
There's no truth to the rumors. It is a European style track, which just means that the field in the middle is wider, so the curves are a little bit bigger. It is still a 400-meter track. It's more of a collegiate track than a high school track. It has been certified to be able to handle everything up to and including state track meets. So there's no concern. So anybody that's telling you that we can't host track meets there, it's just not true. It has been designed to those specifications. Some people would even say it's maybe even a little bit of faster track because the turns aren't quite as tight, but all within the legal ramifications. Part of the reason they call it a European track is because soccer fields tend to be wider than football fields. And so back when they started doing these, it happened to originate in Europe. So they get a wider soccer field in between there, and they just change that way. But it's still a 400-meter track, still has the regular straightaways. It has all those things. And it should look basically brand new after they get done doing what they're going to be doing to it this summer. So,
Is there a motion to approve the agreement?
President, I just wanted to make a comment.
Okay.
I just wanted to say that having been one of those people that met in the construction trailer at 6 in the morning or whatever it was over the process of putting the school together, the discussions related to our track and our fields were extensive in trying to be very broad and very thorough in terms of being able to accommodate almost any sport. So I echo Nick's remarks, and I'm glad you asked the question, Jamie. But it's worth discussing the positive sides of all the planning.
Well, anytime we can dispel fake news, we always try to do that. So, all right. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Carrie, second by Bruce. All those in favor of approving the mutual release with Upper Midwest Athletic Construction, Inc., say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion passes. Next up is proposal for end of year grading for the school year at all levels. Sandy's raising her hand, so I think Sandy, this is yours.
Yes, thank you. Today is just day 14 of remote learning. That's hard to believe, but only 14 days. So much has changed in such a short amount of time.
as a parent, it feels like it's been going on for months. Months.
In our new environment, we want to ensure all students have the opportunity to focus on learning while protecting the academic progress of all students who are negatively impacted by family situations, technology access, or opportunity gaps exacerbated by distance learning. We have reviewed district policies and procedures, and at this time, they require no short-term modifications. What we feel we do need to address and are recommending is a shift in grading practices. We included in the board packet a draft letter that's intended for our K-12 students and families following board approval or modifications. And I will attempt to put it up on the screen. And then I need to find, there it be, I think.
That was much smoother than Dave's attempt. Well done, Sandy.
I'm just going to scroll down a bit. Hopefully that's working. So what we're proposing for second semester 2020 is as follows. The high school will implement a choice-based grading system where students will choose all pass-fail or all letter grades. Once a decision has been made, it will not be able to be changed later in the student's academic career. So for example, if they're a sophomore right now, and then they get to their senior year and go, oh, I think I should have done pass-fail. Nope, a decision holds for the rest of their academic career. The second semester will be graded as one term. There'll not be a separate third quarter grade posted. And the week prior to the end of the semester, and note that we're saying the week prior because we aren't sure when that's going to end up being, students will select from one of two options, pass-fail or letter grade. If no selection is made, the default will be pass-fail. Again, both options will be for all second semester courses. And then it lays out pass fail would be in essence a D- or higher. Their GPA would freeze as it stands and the calculation would kick back in fall semester 2020. Letter grades will be calculated from the final cumulative percentage that the student earns throughout the semester, and that all required work must be completed to select letter grade option. At the middle school, we'll continue to focus on essential standards and quality feedback, and we would move to a pass-fail system. And at the elementary, we have been using a 4-3-2-1, and we would move to an M, meeting expectations, and D, developing as end of third trimester marks. Both of those marks are currently available on the elementary report card. We just have right now been simply using them for learning skills. So again, teaching and learning seeking the board's approval. This was discussed at the last week's board work session, and I believe you probably see some of the discussion has been incorporated into our letter, and so I'll take any comments or questions. Dave and I will take any comments or questions.
Mr. President?
Yes, Bruce.
First of all, I think this document does take into consideration a lot of the questions or concerns. So thank you very much for at least listening to those. And I think also it looks pretty solid overall. I guess just one question, just in terms of the grading. So we'll be grading at one just for the final quarter, or pardon me, for the final semester in total. I presume that will be up to each teacher in terms of how they're doing that. So for instance, with the exception of maybe 7 days, 8 days or so, we pretty much had the third quarter done, correct?
Correct.
And some teachers may look at their third quarter grade, since that was in person and probably more normal, and put more weight towards that than they would towards the final of the year, just in terms of what's being done. Is there any guidance that you guys provide in terms of how to look at that and how to maybe try and keep some parity there amongst how teachers are putting grades together over a total semester? Does that make sense? Does that question make sense?
Yes,
Yeah,
I see Dave raising his hand.
Yeah, I was involved in a couple of direct conversations with high school folks about this and the guidance we provided. Essentially, it's to give the benefit of the doubt to the student in every circumstance. So we would never put a student in a position where the way a teacher would make a choice, if it's not crystal clear, would lower a student's grade. So an example of the way that might play out, like you said, we were almost done with the third quarter. We could have had a situation where maybe a student had a few missing assignments and the teacher said, okay, we're done entering grades right now. No, we're going to go back and make sure that we give the student every opportunity to complete that and finish. In terms of a different weighting, no, we're not looking at a different weighting system.
Okay.
This did, though, it did sort of illuminate some things we're going to tighten up as we move forward. There were some discrepancies before we went into this new environment where the way grades were recorded were different, and there were some significant differences. So we're going to tighten that up as we move into next year.
Okay. I thank you. I was just curious if maybe the weighting would be like, well, Q3 third quarter was much more like normal, so we'll put 75% of the weight towards that and 25% towards the fourth quarter, just because it's just not normal. And I don't know that there are finals per se that are being administered either. So that therefore a lot of teams I think had more weight in the final, and now that that's not necessarily there. You would think a lot would maybe be towards that third quarter, but overall, I mean, I think this really captures a lot of those questions that may be out there. The week prior to the semester end, so that's basically the week prior to the end of the school year, right? Or before that semester end there. So again, appreciate you guys looking into that as well. So no questions here. I think this looks great.
I have one question, Mr. President.
Carrie?
Kind of related to Bruce's comments. What about for the situation if a teacher is not as adept at teaching with this method, and say a student, maybe going in or third quarter had an A, drops to a C, and he or she's looking at having to then go all pass fail so as to not wreck that GPA for the semester, when maybe he or she's reached out and tried to get additional help, but not necessarily through the fault of the teacher, but they haven't been able to provide that help. Would there be any type of grievance or exception for one class when there has been a significant drop in fourth quarter?
We
And
definitely
no
will-
other classes have seen a similar drop.
Sure. We definitely be willing to work with a family or student if that were the situation. The thing that I would say though is that circumstance could present itself if we were in the normal environment as well, where there could be a difference in the way one teacher grades or provides support than another. So what I would hope is that if that situation became apparent, that the administration would become aware, and then we could work with that teacher and the family to try to not have that be a situation that presents itself at the end of the semester.
So families do have the option to reach out prior to late May.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
We want them, and the teachers, this is a really interesting thing, because originally when we looked at this, we sort of assumed that the primary audience for the choice to go to grades would be families or students that had a lot of AP classes. Well, we've realized after digging into this and putting a lot of thought into it, there could be several students that might find benefit. And one that we identified, not a student, but a sort of a set of circumstances, would be a student, let's say it's a junior, and freshman and sophomore year, they really didn't have it clicking in all cylinders. So their grades weren't very high. And then this year as a junior, they got it all put together. And this was their year to boost their GPA because they figured things out. That approach of selecting a grade might benefit them as well. So we're working not only with individual teachers, but individual students, where counselors might reach out, not might, they will. We're giving them the information. They'll work with advisors, because we're going to provide that data to say these are other students or situations that may merit consideration for opting into the grade.
Okay, great, thank you.
I saw Sandy nodding her head as Dave was giving that answer to Carrie's question. Sandy, do you have anything to add to that about looking?
No,
at-
I was just going to make sure that Dave mentioned, and he did at the end, that we've met with counselors, and so they're all on board so they can help that support as well. So if administration gets a call they can't necessarily answer, they'll direct those families and or students to counselors to talk through what would be the best option looking at their specific circumstance.
President, I'd just like to echo something I thought I heard in between the lines on Dave's comments, and that is, by now, we're looking at like a body of accomplishments or a body of work by students. So we call them artifacts with the teachers, but it isn't, I think we have lots to look at in terms of the profile of the student by now too, to help guide our best, judgment of their academic accomplishments.
This notion of a student, dropping performance in isolated class, or maybe 2 classes out of 6 or 7 or whatever. But that's no different than whether we had this COVID situation and virtual learning be the same as well. You would hope that those families are going to the counselor and to the particular teacher long before, a week before the end of the year.
Correct.
And I think I'll take this opportunity for anyone out there that may be listening, that's our number one piece of advice. Please reach out and ask for support, ask for clarification. We want to be able to work with all families and help them understand, whether we're talking about the technology support, the grading system. We definitely want them to reach out to teachers, reach out to administrators, counselors, so we can get them all the support they need.
All right, very good. Is there a motion to approve this modification to the grading system with these circumstances?
So moved.
Bruce?
Second.
Carrie got her hand up first, so Carrie gets the second on that one. To Bruce's motion, all those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed? The motion carries. Last on our action item is selection of a delegate to the CISA 11 Annual Convention, which is going to be held June 1st by Zoom. Do we have any volunteers? Any volunteers that want to go to another Zoom meeting on June 1st at 7 o'clock? All right.
I'll do it.
All right. Thank you, Rob. That saved us from a motion. What I was going to suggest is we could pick on the one board member who has not filled out their annual survey for school board assessment. Since 6 of us have, there's one person who hasn't. We won't even have to name names since I don't know who it is anyway. And then we could just say that person gets to be the CISA delegate. But maybe this is a better way. Thank you, Rob, for your volunteerism. Is there any other volunteers? Do we want to make an election out of it? Since our school board election wasn't contested last week, we got to have some kind of contested election here. All right. I don't see anybody. Everybody purposely put their mics on mute and nobody's raising their hand. So all in favor of selecting Rob as the delegate, say aye.
Aye.
Oh, wait, we should have a second. We got Rob volunteered. I need a second.
Second.
I second.
All right. Heather, second. All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries. Last up,
Thanks,
we have a
Rob.
motion. Way to go, Rob. Next up, we have going into closed session. I need the language followed pursuant to the agenda and the
Read that.
statutory language. Carrie?
The board will entertain a motion to convene in closed session pursuant to Wisconsin statute 19.85, parent 1, parent C, to discuss and take action, if appropriate, regarding the employment and performance evaluation data of public employees over which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility, consideration of certified staff, employment, resignation, retirement, and or preliminary notice of contract non-renewal.
All right. Is there a second?
Second.
Second, Heather. And we will unmute mics so that we can get your vote recorded. We'll go roll call. Hanson?
Aye.
Katas?
Aye.
Whitaker?
Aye.
Bauman?
Aye.
Loglin?
Aye.
Brown? I saw his mouth move. He said aye. And Johnson is aye. The motion passes. We'll move into closed session, which means that we will drop the feed to YouTube. Everyone stay on your cameras. You can mute your mics and then.
No, so you'll leave this meeting and you're going to the new meeting that I invited you to.
All right. We have to go to a completely separate meeting. Very good. All right. Everyone can drop off. Thank you. Meeting
Thank you.
adjourned.